All right, so this last piece of kind of classical conditioning and also with operant conditioning kind of talks about the crossover between the two. So biology in conditioning is super important. We can't kind of neglect to mention that certain things are easier for us to be conditioned towards. And a guy named John Garcia kind of was one of the leading researchers with this, and found that it was easier for us to learn associations that make sense for survival. So, for instance, food aversions. We're going to learn a food aversion much more quickly than we will other types of conditioning. And oftentimes it only takes one trial for that food aversion to occur versus like kind of the lengthy acquisition process that's needed for the other ones. And it makes sense. And I'm sure a lot of you probably have examples of this in your life where, you got food poisoning and now you can't even think about that food without kind of feeling nauseous. And that's classical conditioning. Now, in terms of the cognitive processes in the two, okay, oops, I forgot to make this big here. In classical conditioning, when the dog salivates at the bell, it may be due to kind of cognition, learning to predict, even expecting the food. Conditioned responses can alter your attitudes, even when we know that the change is caused by conditioning, okay? And then, however, knowing that our reactions are caused by conditioning gives us the option of mentally breaking the association. For instance, deciding that nausea associated with a food aversion is actually caused by an illness, and then being able to kind of like consciously overcome and being able to eat that food again, particularly if it was a food that you really enjoyed before you got the food poisoning. You can kind of talk your way through it. Now, higher order conditioning involves some cognition. The name of the food may even trigger salivation. So, for instance, mentioning your favorite food alone might be enough for you to become to kind of have the conditioned response as well. So, in classical conditioning, we can't, ignore some of the cognitive mental processes that play a role. Now, in operant conditioning, in fixed interval reinforcements, animals do more target behaviors responses around the time that the reward is more likely, as if they're expecting the reward. And expectation as a cognitive skill is even more evident in the ability of humans to respond to delayed reinforcers, such as paychecks, right? And other things. Knowing that a reward is coming is oftentimes enough for us to kind of have that conditioning process. Now, higher order conditioning can be enabled with cognition. For instance, seeing something such as money as a reward because of its indirect value. And humans can set behavioral goals for their self and others and plan their own reinforcers. So, in a sense, you can operantly condition yourself. And some of you may have done this. I'll study for 20 minutes and then I'm going to reward myself with this. Or if I do this for myself, I'm going to reward myself with a new shirt or with a food item or something like that. So, humans can, because of our advanced cognition, can kind of classically and operant condition ourselves in a way. Now, how do learning, rewards, and motivation all play a role? Well, again, we've talked about these two terms before, but intrinsic motivation, which refers to a desire to perform behavior well for its own sake, where we do it because we like the feeling of satisfaction. Extrinsic motivation refers to doing a behavior to receive rewards from others. And intrinsic motivation can be reduced by external rewards and can be prevented by using continuous reinforcement. So, in terms of applications of operant conditioning, we have to make sure that, like we talked about, positive reinforcement sometimes is the best way to do things, but the type of positive reinforcement that you use needs to be, you need to be careful. Maybe praise instead of a monetary reward, because that's going to encourage your intrinsic motivation because you want to do well because it makes you feel good versus doing it because you're going to receive a reward. So one principle for maintaining behavior is to use as few rewards as possible and to fade the rewards over time, or to start transitioning from maybe the physical rewards to the more kind of the verbal rewards and things like that. So what might happen if we begin to reward a behavior somebody was already doing and enjoying? Okay, and this is a tricky thing, is that what we see is sometimes they lose that intrinsic motivation and they start to do it only for the intrinsic. Okay, and this is sometimes what we see happen with professional athletes that enjoyed it, but then they started getting paid for it, and then they start to lose some of their passion, because now are they doing it because they still enjoy it, or are they doing it because of their money, the money? All right, next time we're going to talk about